Hi everyone, welcome back! I was approached by HouseArtUK, a company that sells paint by numbers, to review their kits, and since the paint in their kits is acrylic paint, I decided to accept it. As you saw in my previous video, my first steps into acrylic painting were quite rough, and I thought that these paint by number kits could be a great way to get more familiar with acrylic painting. Before we start, here's a small disclaimer. I was sent this kit for free to review, but the opinions are my own. As a matter of fact, this video was meant to be a simple unboxing and first impressions review, but I obviously had to be extra. I really wanted to make the best of this opportunity to explore acrylic painting, so I'll also be sharing in this video some of the tips and tricks I learned along the way. From the moment I started painting on the canvas provided, I kept wanting to try and make things easier for me, and I went into a big rabbit hole on paint transparency, how to best cover up the numbers on the canvas, and how to achieve the best results on a paint by numbers painting. I even learned how to stretch the canvas. Before I share more about what I've learned, let's start with the unboxing. Inside the parcel were two packages. Inside the main cardboard package, we had the paint kits, which included the canvas, a paper copy of the canvas, which was very handy when I occasionally needed to double check the colors, a plastic magnifying lens, and some metal pins to use with the frame. When I was contacted by HouseArtUK, I didn't really know what to pick, and after a couple of days of looking at the options on their website, I gave them two paintings I was interested in. I was incredibly surprised they offered to send both, and I'm very thankful for their kindness. Initially, I really liked the painting called Sunflowers, Field and Blue Sky, but the smallest option available was 40 by 50 centimeters, and I wanted to try the smallest size HouseArtUK has available first, as that would be easier to record and do a review on. So my second option was a painting called City by the Water, which was available in 40 by 40 centimeters. The second package HouseArtUK sent included the wood strips to frame the canvas and the brush sets. Each paint by numbers kit comes with its own brush set, and since I received two kits, I also received two of these sets. The brushes included in the kit have blue handles and include two round brushes and a flat brush. I really wanted to test out how feasible it would be to do a painting with just these brushes, so I tried to limit myself to using these three brushes for the majority of the painting. However, I did use the brushes from the professional set here and there, as I also wanted to be able to share with you if they are worth it. Regarding the canvas, I was pleasantly surprised that it did not have any hard kinks or bends on it, and the few waves it had for being rolled up into the rectangular box disappeared after I had left it flat on a table overnight. Inside the smaller brush set package, you also have the fastening set, so you can transform your standalone canvas into wall art. HouseArtUK was also very kind and included in the package their professional brush set for me to try. They do have another brush set available on their website, which is very similar to one I bought when I first started painting and that I still use occasionally. That other brush set does include different brush shapes and sizes, and I actually think it would generally be more useful for a beginner in painting, but since I already own a similar set, I'm very happy they decided to include their professional brush set instead. One thing I really liked about the paint by number kits HouseArtUK offers is the ability to choose how complex you'd like your painting to be, or in other words, how long you'd like to take to finish your painting. They offer the option to choose between 24, 36 or 48 colors. 36 colors seems to be their best seller option, but I decided to make it challenging and choose the 48 colors for both kits. The paint selection for each kit comes with a small preview image, and mine came arranged into trays, which made it very easy to find and select the colors as I painted. Now, when I first got this package, I wanted to dive straight in before doing any research on paint by numbers. I decided to start painting on the top left as I'm right-handed, and it didn't take me long to find out that some colors just aren't as opaque as I'd like. According to various people on the internet, the common offenders for this issue in acrylic paintings are the yellows, oranges, and reds, but some other colors with a lighter value might also be semi-transparent. The colors I used right in the beginning were giving me this issue, and I struggled to cover the number on the canvas. With the yellow color number 16, I did manage to cover the number by using 2 layers and then carefully placing a dot over the number. However, with the orange color number 33, I did 1 layer before deciding I should do some research first. As I didn't know what to expect from a paint by numbers kit, and also due to not being familiar with acrylic painting, I had the wrong expectation that I would only need 1 layer to cover up a section. I think this assumption came from the fact that gouache paint is incredibly opaque unless I dilute it too much. However, acrylic paint is not like gouache, even if the consistency somehow does remind me of it, and it does have a wider range of transparencies. Before I share with you what I managed to learn and what worked for me, let's frame the canvas. Initially, I was going to keep the canvas on my table and just work on it directly, but that would mean that I would have about 80% of my table occupied for at least a couple of months, and that wasn't very convenient for my current setup. I certainly didn't want to risk bending or adding any kinks to the canvas, so I decided to frame it and work on it that way. I have never painted directly on a canvas and I have never stretched one, but I knew the logistics to get it done, so I decided to give it a go. I have to say, I found it very tricky to line up the canvas on the frame. Only later did I find out that I could have marked the corners and edges of the painting on the inside of the canvas by using a window. This would have definitely helped get it lined up faster. When I finally managed to line it all up, I started carefully placing the metal pins around the frame. I did have to remove them and readjust the canvas a couple of times, and once I was finished, I unfortunately noticed the canvas was a little bit loose. It was a very tricky process to get the correct tension on the canvas while recording and without me covering the camera, so the very next day, and off camera, I tightened the canvas. To do that, I took out the corner pins and then removed the pins from one side, stretched the canvas the best that I could, and I placed them back, before moving to the next side. This time, I used my own body to pull against the canvas as much as I possibly could. Once I was done, I also managed to correctly fold all the corners, which was something I struggled with on my first try, and finally the canvas was stretched with a good enough tension to be able to hold my resting hand without bowing in. I later did find it a little bit tricky to paint around the corners and edges of the frame, but it was a matter of adding a few more layers of paint on these particular areas. Now, getting to the rabbit hole that was figuring out all the possible ways of making sure the numbers on the canvas don't show up after a section is painted. In summary, here are all the different ways I tried. Use 2 or more layers of paint. Apply a slightly thicker drop of paint over the number. Use a white or a very light color of acrylic paint to cover the number and then paint as usual. Apply clear gesso to the canvas. And finally, adjust the consistency of the paints. I decided to test all of these options and then pick the combination of options I felt gave me the best results, and I used it for the rest of the painting. The first 2 options, which were applying more layers and using a dot of paint, had already been tested when I first unboxed this kit. With the exception of these 2 sections, I used the same brush for all the other sections I tested to make the comparison more fair. As I already had a section with just 1 layer of paint using the orange color number 33, I decided to use that section as control for the next row of tests. To test the next option, which was covering the number using white or a very light color of acrylic paint, I decided to try an acrylic marker by Molotow in Signal White, and also both fluid acrylic and regular acrylic paints. Both the acrylic paints were System 3 by De La Rowney in Titanium White. On all the 3 sections where I covered up the number with white acrylic paint, I first left the white acrylic paint to dry, and only then I painted the section with the orange acrylic paint over top. Between all the 3 options of white acrylic paint, I found that the acrylic marker was by far the most convenient, and it is what I ended up using for the rest of my painting. Besides the convenience factor, I didn't notice a difference between these 3 options. A small tip I saw online was that if your kit includes a white color, you can also use that color or another matching lighter color to cover up the number on the canvas instead of having to buy a separate tube of acrylic paint. I already owned those 2 tubes of acrylic paint, so I didn't have to buy them, but I did have to buy the acrylic marker, which is not a problem because I know I will use it for sketching. Also, between the fluid acrylic and regular acrylic paints, I found it much easier to paint using the fluid acrylic, but this is probably a personal preference. On a smaller note, I also ended up using the white fluid acrylic paint to help me clean up the painting edges in places where I had gone outside the lines. As for the clear gesso, I chose to use one by Liquitex. After applying, I noticed it gave a rougher texture to the canvas and that helped the paint to hold on to it more easily. From the footage, it might not look like it helped much in covering up the number on the canvas, but there is a slight improvement when compared with just one layer of acrylic paint without gesso underneath. Mostly, the improvement comes from the fact that the gesso, by providing that rough texture, helps you apply the paint more evenly, and also, as the gesso has already filled in the canvas texture, it helps with the painting not ending up with random white dots of the canvas texture that weren't properly filled in with color. Please bear in mind that different paint by number companies might provide canvases with different finishes, so results might vary, especially when it comes to the gesso. Just for the record, here are some short clips of the sections I painted to test all these different options. I hope having recorded this is somewhat useful to anyone who is interested in delving into the world of paint by numbers. As mentioned, my favorite combination was using the clear gesso, then using the white acrylic marker to cover the numbers, and then paint the section with at least 2 layers of the required color, preferably with a more fluid consistency. Before I forget to mention this, not all the colors required me to use the white acrylic marker underneath. I personally enjoyed painting over the gesso so much more than directly on the canvas, so I went ahead and applied it to the entire canvas. I had planned on varnishing these finished paintings anyways, so I had already bought myself a large paddle brush to help apply the varnish more evenly. Luckily, this brush was also very handy for applying the gesso, but I've also seen people using squeegees to spread the gesso. Lastly, I noticed when doing the tests on covering the numbers on the canvas that the white fluid acrylic paint was easier to paint with than the regular white acrylic paint. This was the reason why I decided to play around with adjusting the acrylic paint consistency to see if that would improve the painting experience. When I tried painting these test sections, I did find myself struggling to move the orange acrylic paint around and not have the end result look streaky. Yes, I'm aware that the size and shape of the brush used to paint also plays a part in this, but even smaller sections were giving me the streaky, uneven look I so desperately wanted to avoid. There are a couple of ways to adjust the paint consistency depending on what you would like to invest in. The cheaper, more accessible option is to just use plain water to make the paint less thick and make it flow more easily. The other option is to use an acrylic medium specially made for this. I decided to try Flow Aid by Liquitex, but please keep in mind that there might be other options out there. I'm a beginner in acrylic painting, so I'm not an expert on the subject. In order to adjust the paint consistency, I mixed in a couple of drops of the Flow Aid and then water. Because the brand new paint pots had limited space for adding extra water, more often than not I had to paint one initial layer of that particular color on as many sections as I could throughout the canvas, and only then I would have more space in the paint pot to mix in more water. At my preferred consistency, the paint barely held a peak when I lifted the toothpick I stirred it with, as demonstrated here with, yet again, the orange color number 33. The closest comparison I can think for this consistency is that of natural yogurt after it has been stirred. I do need to warn you though that by adding anything to the paint, you are obviously diluting the pigment and therefore making the paint less opaque. In my case, since the more fluid paint allowed me to paint a thicker but smoother layer, I could barely notice a difference. But if I was to compare the before and after when painting with the same technique, I'm sure I would see a drop in the opacity of the paints. Also, just in case you aren't familiar with the Flow Aid additive, you aren't meant to use it this way. It is recommended that you dilute in water first, and the ratio is way different from what I ended up doing, so take my advice with a grain of salt. So, long story short, my favorite ways to improve the paint by numbers experience and reduce frustration were prime the whole canvas with gesso, use an acrylic marker to cover up the numbers for semi-transparent and transparent paints, and, as soon as the paint pot had space, make the acrylic paint more fluid. Regarding the paint brushes, as I'm not very experienced in acrylic painting and I had never tried a paint by numbers kit before receiving these, I wasn't sure what I would prefer in terms of brush characteristics. For example, a watercolor brush can either be soft and bendy or more snappy, and I enjoy using both for different situations. All the brushes I received were incredibly soft, and only a couple had minimal stray hairs which I could easily trim out. Overall, I really liked the 3 blue handle brushes, and I didn't feel it would have been a hurdle if I only had those brushes to paint with. In that smaller brush set, I got a small-sized round brush which was suitable for the complex 48 color painting I chose, and I also got an even smaller round brush that allowed me to easily paint the very fine details of the painting. The flat brush was also incredibly useful for larger areas and allowed me to paint these faster and more evenly. I really do feel that the brush selection was quite solid for what I had to paint. I also really liked using the professional brush set, and I have a feeling this would be great for watercolor as well. This bigger set included 11 round brushes of different sizes, and by comparison I managed to estimate that one of the round blue handle brushes was a size 4 zeros and the other one was in between a 0 and a 00. The only critique I would give about the bigger professional brush set is that it could be made even better if a couple of the larger round brushes were swapped with 2 or 3 flat brushes of different sizes. Other than that, the softness and bendiness of the bristles of all the brushes I used meant that I was able to apply an even layer of paint without much struggle. If you are planning on doing more than one paint by numbers kit, I would definitely recommend that you get yourself the bigger professional brush set. If you have been following me on Instagram, you might have seen the progress photos of this painting that I've been sharing on my stories. I started sharing these progress photos towards the end of March, but I started working on this video and the painting 2 weeks earlier. This was a very detailed painting and I did find myself making very slow progress. Unlike for a diamond painting, where you just apply the gems and move on, with a paint by numbers painting, you do have the option to keep tweaking a section until it looks as good as you want it, which is what happened to me. I really wanted to have this painting look amazing, so I let my perfectionism take the wheel and made sure that all the edges between the sections were as crisp as they could be and that there was no streakiness whatsoever anywhere on the canvas. I'm not gonna lie, I was afraid I was going to run out of paint, but that didn't happen. When it comes to paint transparencies, I feel that this painting was probably not the best for beginners for 2 reasons. 1. 48 colors is incredibly complex and detailed, but that was my choice. And second, this painting had a lot of oranges. As I mentioned earlier in the video, yellows, oranges and red acrylic paints are the common offenders for being more transparent. Another thing I want to address is the different strategies you can use to do the actual painting. The most important and obvious of all is to start at the top right or left, depending if you are left-handed or right-handed respectively. And how about the sections or colors? Should you go for dark colors first to give you a sense of progress in such a big painting? Or should you go for light colors first? Should you paint as many sections of that color and then move on to the next color? Should you challenge yourself in painting the colors in number order? Honestly, I don't think any of it matters as much as the location or where you start painting on the canvas. If you have the tendency to hyperfocus as much as me, then you need to make sure that your hands stay out of the way of the wet sections to avoid making a mess. Personally, and as I mentioned before, I chose to paint enough sections of a specific color until the paint pot had enough space for me to adjust the paint consistency to what I found to be more comfortable to paint with. But after I reached that point, I roughly kept myself in the same area of the painting, swapping colors every 2 to 3 sections. I also chose to paint light colors first because 9 out of 10 times they needed more layers to be truly opaque. This way, I made sure to properly cover not only the numbers on the canvas, but also the lines in between sections. The dark colors didn't give me as many issues, even without adjusting the paint consistency, so I was very happy to just paint them towards the end of a particular area before moving to another area of the painting. This video is getting a little bit too long than usual for me, so I'm going to wrap it up here. If you'd like to know anything else, just drop me a comment down below and I'll get back to you. As a conclusion, I would just like to say that when I first started working on this painting, I had the grand vision that somehow I would manage to figure out the best way to do a paint by numbers painting using only one layer of every color, but I was so wrong. It didn't take me long in the painting process to find out that acrylic paints can be amazing to build depth, which means layering is essential if you want a truly solid color. Even with the different strategies I chose to use, I ended up doing at least 2 layers for almost every color, just to make sure that the finished painting was looking as opaque as it could. So, will I do another paint by numbers ever again? Well, yes, since I was offered 2 paintings to do. Also, now I feel a lot more confident that I won't ruin the second painting, which was my favorite and my preference, after all that I've learned during this first painting process. I will probably get the painting and canvas ready, just to leave it on my desk for those days where I just want to put paint to paper, but I'm feeling uninspired or only have 5 minutes to spare. But since this painting alone took me more than 3 months to complete, I honestly can't wait to move on to other painting projects. I absolutely loved working on this painting and this video, and I'm very thankful for HouseArtUK for providing me these 2 kits to play with, but it's time to do a bit of a shuffle on my hobbies and open my sketchbooks again. Before I end this video, I also wanted to share that the original blue handle brushes held up super well throughout this whole painting, as you can see in the comparison footage against the new brushes from the second painting kit. I also realized halfway through this painting that I don't really enjoy swapping brushes, which is probably why I enjoy watercolor so much. Almost all of the time, I ended up using the same brush for as many sections as I could. This means that I ended up using the smaller blue handle brush on almost 70 to 80% of the painting, and mostly used the bigger brushes on first layers or much bigger sections. Anyways, thank you so much for watching all the way through the end of this video. If you enjoyed it, please don't forget to click the like button and subscribe for more if you haven't already. Also, since you've watched this video all the way through the end, please also leave a leaf emoji in the comments below. Not only are emojis cute, but it also helps a lot with the algorithm and for my video to reach more people. My next video is going to be dedicated to cleaning up some old palettes that were needing some TLC, so if that interests you, feel free to click the notification button so you are notified when that video goes live. Once again, thank you so much for watching and see you in the next video!